An axiom in show business maintains that directing is 90% casting. And the other 10%? Most directors will tell you it is correcting their casting mistakes. There's probably no decision in theater or film more emotionally fraught or more crucial than casting a production. I'm Patrick Pacheco of New York One and the LA Times for the American Theater Wing. And I'm delighted to welcome three veterans of that most essential process to working in the theater. Daniel Swee, who casts productions primarily for Lincoln Center Theater. David Caparelliotis, who has worked primarily with Manhattan Theater Club and has his own company. And Rubin, who has worked with everybody under the sun, including directors Susan Stroman, Mike Nichols, Trevor Nunn, and Nick Heitner, to name just a few. Welcome all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess it starts with the text for you. You get a copy of the play. Is that where it totally starts in the casting process? Mm-hmm. Tara?
Yes, we read the play, and it's different with each situation. Sometimes we read the play and make a list, sometimes, and then usually we would have a meeting with either the director or, if it's a contemporary playwright, director and producer and playwright, or some combination of those three people. Sometimes it's if it's a revival or an existing text, that changes things a little bit because either the writer won't be around and participating in the process, and then there's the history of that text to consider in our production. So we start with that. We usually make a list, and those lists can end up being completely off the mark and thrown away, and we start over after the meeting. But I usually think of them as, I usually try to make those kind of general, and
cast the net pretty wide at first.
Yes, and start to engage the ideas of the director, and
you sort of, it's interesting because you always run the risk a little bit. I don't know how you feel. We were saying in the green room that we know what we do because we share the same profession, but how we do it, it's sort of a mystery. So it's so interesting to hear other people talk about what we do. In doing the initial list, there's a fine line between going off thesis a little bit and saying, I'm not sure if this is right, but I'd like to put this idea down. And if you've not worked with the team, you run the risk of them thinking, what the hell is he thinking? So you want to be creative, but at the same time, not so creative that they're like, I've clearly made a mistake in who I hired here.
Well, you basically want to, the initial list, I think, is about finding a jumping off place for discussion,
Yes,
so that you
absolutely.
then enter into discussion with the director, with the writer, if they're alive, with the producer, about what it is you're looking for, how they see. What's most important is finding out how your director and how your writer see the role. And hearing that, because you know how you've seen it initially from your first read, I think. And then the great thing about the casting process is it so kind of transforms in the process of doing it. So the conversation may start off one way and be at a completely different place 2 hours later, and that's the exciting part of it. And being part of that conversation, I think, is the exciting part of what we do.
Right.
Have you ever read a play, a new work obviously, and decided, I can't do this, and dropped out?
I haven't.
You've never had that experience?
I have.
And what was the red flag for you, David?
Honestly, it's a guttural response. I think maybe in some ways the same way an actor reads a play and responds or doesn't. It's just, listen, it's a luxury to have job offers, so I'm not in a position to turn many jobs down. It's been very, very rare, but it's just something that sometimes I feel like, this particular subject matter is not, I just don't have an in. I don't think I'm the guy that is going to be able to be illustrative in any way, or I don't think I have anything particularly to offer, and knowing my colleagues, I imagine there's someone else that actually will.
I think that's true also. I think sometimes as well there are various other pressures come to bear in terms of knowing what the expectation is from a producer on a project that you're asked to do, or timing. That more than anything else is what's going to be required when. We're often at the mercy of the director's schedules, the producer's schedules, all sorts of other things which are extremely complex, and so you have to figure out, well, can you actually do this job in the time allotted?
When you walk into a room with obviously producer, director, writer, composer in the case of a musical, who has veto power? Who has power in the room in terms of casting?
the money question.
Everyone does.
Yeah, it really
Everyone
is.
does, and it all depends. I mean, it depends on who the producer is, who the director is. Is it a regional project? And so an artistic director might have a strong role in the casting process. Most artistic directors are incredibly supportive and collaborative, and they want to nurture the ideas of their directors. So I would rarely think that an artistic director would exercise veto power. And they're usually the ones who are most eager to help things work
Well,
out.
they're there for, and often what they're great at is guidance. You know, is
Yes.
they're doing this all the time as well, so they have great perspective and often great wisdom in terms of that, I think.
I think it points to, sorry, Daniel, I think it points to actually one of the main roles as a casting director, I think, is it's sort of like working for the UN.
Completely.
Because a lot
Serving
of it
of
is
many masters, yes.
Yeah, and it's about mediation, arbitration. It's about helping
Consensus
people-
building.
Yeah, consensus building. Because at any given point, I could know, Daniel, Tara could know, the director clearly is leading there. The writer seems to want this. The producers seem to want this. And so we walk in the room, kind of knowing perhaps where the allegiances lie, and trying to think, sort of like in a chess game, how can we facilitate getting everyone to the same point?
Well, and the other thing, and I think this is probably a theme that will come up throughout this conversation, is we're collaborators. That, I think, more than anything else, is what we do. We're part of a collaborative process, and it's what we love about this, I think. And it's often a political process. It's often a complex process, but it's very much collaborative, and it's so much about the relationship you have with the director and with the writer and with the institution if you work for an institution, or with the producer when you're working with a producer. And it is what's so gratifying about doing it for a long period of time, I think. But it's complicated.
There's a story to tell, you know? There's a story to tell. You need to know what that is, how you're going to tell it, who are the right people to tell the story that this team has decided to tell. That's the way I always kind of start looking at it. So, like, is it a village? Like, we're creating a little village of people who are going to, and even if it's, you know, a revival of a musical, it's a village of people who are going to have to, you know, play roles in telling the story. And so putting all of that together.
What's the most important quality in terms of playing that UN role, as you described it, David? Is it patience? Is it listening to both the subtext of what's going on in the room as well as what's actually going on in the room?
I think it's all of the above.
It is.
Absolutely. You have to be really good at and sensitive about reading people about, and really good about listening to them and seeing what different people want. And you know, some situations are completely what they are and are completely out front. It's like any relationships, and other ones are much more complex, and you have to figure out how to get other people to communicate with each other. You know, it's often not just communicating with them, but
Getting them to communicate. And how do you do that?
I think the same way you would do it at dinner, Thanksgiving dinner with your family.
100%. Absolutely.
Let's talk about specific directors that you've worked with. Now, I know that you've worked, I believe, with Daniel Sullivan a lot.
Yeah.
Who's a obviously brilliant director.
fortunate.
You've all worked with
Yeah.
brilliant directors. I think obviously on Good People, is that right?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about how he approaches casting and how you work with him in approaching casting.
He's a touchstone for me in terms of my career, because one of the first plays I worked on with him was Proof, and Nancy Piccioni, who is the director of casting at Manhattan Theatre Club, was sort of leading that project, but I was working on it with them. And Dan, as I've said before publicly, scared the hell out of me, because he's very close to the vest. He's a lovely man, but he's amazingly intelligent, and he's laser sharp. His focus is amazing. He knows what he wants. He's open to other things, but he knows what he wants. So cut to, now I've worked with him on 5 or 6 shows, and I have an idea of what kind of actors he will respond to, what his aesthetic is. And I think that's part of our job too, when we're fortunate to work with people over and over, is this is the kind of person that I think he will respond to.
And who are those people? Those actors?
Honestly, for Daniel, good, intelligent actors, very good, intelligent actors. You know, I mean, he responds to talent. You know, I mean, he works with people again and again, but at the same time, he is equally as open to meeting someone he's never seen and saying, oh, okay. And I tell actors when they are coming into audition for him sometimes, if you get an adjustment from Daniel Sullivan, if you get the part, that's icing on the cake. But if he actually says, okay, here, boom, you've been adjusted by a master.
Genius,
Good
yeah.
for you. 1 out of 20, you know.
And what
so.
actors would you steer away from him?
That's a tough question to answer, honestly. You know, I mean, I think Daniel does like the actor to lead themselves. He will shape, he will, you know, gently nudge, but he's looking for sort of someone who is going to have clear ideas before they come into the rehearsal room. You know, so I don't know that, I hate the word needy, but an actor who's really looking for a lot of hand-holding is not going to be the kind of actor that you're going to want to send into a room with Daniel. You know?
Fascinating. Tara, you've worked with Mike Nichols, right, on Spamalot, I believe, Country...
The Country Wife.
Country Wife. And I believe that saying that we started with, casting, directing as 90% casting has been attributed to him. I'm not sure he came up with it. But how is it like to work with Mike Nichols in terms of the actors you steer to him?
Well, he's, you know, you're working with him now. I think he's like the most generous person to be in a room with, and he loves actors and he loves talented people. So for me, it was a matter of sort of getting over my initial intimidation that I was like actually sitting in a room with a director who had sort of changed my life with many of the films that he did at certain points in his career, and theater productions too. So, but some things about what you said about Daniel Sullivan, I think, are similar. He responded to really talented people. In Spamalot, of course, we were doing a comedy, so it was there were a lot of funny people who couldn't quite master the Python humor. And so that was a big challenge in the first couple of sessions.
Had Mike done a musical at that point? Was that his first one, or had he?
No, that wasn't his first musical, but you know, he's very, he knows everything that's going on in New York City at any time. And so it was really fun to introduce him. I know when Sada Ramirez came in to audition, it was a spectacular audition, and she's so spectacular. And I think he had seen her because she had been in a Nora Ephron movie, but he had never, you know, I don't think he really knew just how brilliant she was. So that was really fun to be able to introduce him to some new performers, and that turned out to be a really successful collaboration for the two of them. So I enjoyed that part of it. And he taught me a lot about about comedy. I mean, I'd worked on a lot of comedy, and I learned a lot about comedy from working with Susan Stroman too. But he always had this thing about not reaching out and never pushing and never, you know, not reaching out to the audience, but always having the audience come to them. And that really helped me as I continued to work on Spamalot to have, he said that early on in the casting process, and that was something that really helped me as I continued to find people to bring to him.
It's interesting that because I think we learn from directors all the time.
Every day.
It's
Every
again,
day.
one of the great things about what we do, and that we've all had the privilege of working with incredibly talented directors. I mean, it's quite amazing. And you learn something from every one of them. You learn specifically about that show. You learn how they're working on something. You learn how they work with actors. But it gives you insight into how to do your own job tremendously. Certainly how to do your job for them, since we're working for them. And how to continue to do your job when a show runs for a long time. You learn what it is that they want out of casting for that show. But it's just in terms of the long-term benefits of, you know, what you learn from Dan or what you learn from someone like Mike Nichols. It's invaluable.
What have you learned from George Wolfe, say, working with him on Free Man of Color?
He's remarkable in an audition room. He's one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. I think He's incredibly insightful. He's incredibly knowledgeable. What I learned is he's always right. But I'm seriously, someone could come in, whatever, the direction that he would give them in an audition was perfect always. I think he had a sort of remarkable understanding of knowing what was required of each role in that play in terms of what roles particularly required certain kinds of emotional depth, what roles required certain kinds of comedy, or certain kinds of theatricality in a sense, that are maybe often required in Guerre plays. But he's a tremendously remarkable guy, I think.
You've also worked with Matthew Warchus on God of Carnage as well. Is there a difference between working with a British director and an American director in terms of where they're coming from in casting?
I think it's always hard to make generalizations because every British director I've worked with is completely different from each other, just the way every American director is different from each other. I think that there's a different casting process that they tend to come from, a different tradition, don't you think? That a lot of English directors, when you're doing auditions at least, tend to want to do auditions for, they say, well, I'm coming over for 3 days, and so we could, we'll want to do about 45 minutes for each audition. So,
there's a
like
chat.
there's a chat.
But they do it. That oftentimes there'll be a chat. So
The chair will come up to the table for the actor rather than it being farther away, and it's sort of.
But then you have to sort of say eventually, well, that means over 3 days that we can
You're going to see 7 people.
18 people, and there are 14 roles in the play.
But it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because they haven't had the opportunity to be in a casting room with these artists, nor have they really seen their work very much.
You want to get a sense of who they are as a human.
Exactly. So they want to have that. And I also think there's a lot of good manners involved that I couldn't possibly ask you to sing or read for me until after I've given you a few moments to really get to know you. So it's really kind of charming.
It's
but
great.
it's a
funny how actors
logistic
respond to it, though,
challenge.
I know some actors are completely freaked
and
out by it.
it's like in A Chorus Line when he says, "Tell me about yourself." I think it's Morales, and she says, "Give me a part, give me something to say, and I will say it, but I can't just talk about myself." When you tell an actor in the waiting room, "Okay, you're going to come up to the table and sit," well, am I going to do the scene with him right at the table? No, you're just going to talk first. Oh, just about me? Yeah.
And you sometimes have actors who are silent.
Totally.
Are completely silent.
Yes.
Which is also when
unaccustomed
sometimes the
to it.
directors, you realize that by the end of the week that you're working with them, suddenly the chats are only 5 minutes long.
I love it, though. I don't know what you
And they eventually go away.
I love it because I feel like part of what we do is we do try to get in our interactions with actors a sense of what are they bringing into the room just in terms of who they are. Who are they when they buy coffee at Starbucks? How does that relate to who they are when they come into the room? We want that person to come into the room. And I feel like I don't think there's no power that a casting director has, which I think many people that don't understand what we do think that there is. One of the biggest choices that we can make is in terms of who we do choose to bring in. If we have 20 slots, what 20 actors out of 40 do we personally choose to bring in based on our aesthetic, our knowledge of the director, the material? And I think we're going by what we know of those people in some ways. I mean, just for me, I don't know about you guys.
Absolutely, but it's a combination of what you know about them personally, but really what you know about them as an actor. What you know about how they work.
Itself through their
Exactly,
through
what
their
they're
work.
capable of,
Yes.
all sorts of things.
Absolutely.
Like that, I think.
And that metric of 45 minutes for a British director, perhaps, some British directors, is measured against what? 3 minutes for an American director?
10.
Yeah,
10
minutes.
10 or 15 minutes is a usual time slot.
It
for
also depends on the size of the role and
Right.
how much material they've prepared.
How talkative the director is between people that come in.
And we're exaggerating sometimes with English directors. It's a half hour or 20 minutes, and also some of them don't, and I found actually the ones who worked here a lot more often do go to a kind of more American system or 10 or 15 minutes. I think also American actors prepare for auditions very, very differently than English actors. I think that American actors do just a remarkable amount of preparation for auditions in terms of how well they learn material, how much material they're able to learn, and they're sort of able to often be sort of up on their feet working from the first moment, and it allows a different kind of interaction with the director, I think.
Do you, as part of the job description, do you prepare actors for the director? I mean, there's a famous story, obviously, that Meryl Streep based her character of Devil Wears Prada on Mike Nichols, which can be probably an intimidating to come into the room with Mike Nichols. Do you, these actors that you do choose for these slots, do you prepare them for the director in any way?
I mean, I always like to make sure that they know what to expect, you know, but I don't, I mean, I give them, we try to make sure they've had a script, the material that their sides and, you know, whatever material they've been expected to prepare. If there are a lot of people in the room, I often tell them that so that they can kind of avoid having that moment when they walk in and there are 12 people at a table. And if there's going to be a chat, I usually tell them we'll have a little chat before we do the audition, just so that they can kind of line that all up in their minds before they come into the room. But
sometimes we meet actors first that we may not know as well. So before we can bring them in for a director, we have to bring them in just for us. It's called a pre-read. And if it's an actor that clearly is very, very good, but has taken an approach to the material that seems not right for whatever the material is, there may be okay, stop for 1 second. I think whether it's tonally or something that they're just missing, but they seem very right, and you feel like, ooh, I need to give a little bit of a shift. It's a fine line because you don't want to get into the actor's process or instinct at all, because part of what the director is assessing is that person's natural inclination towards the material, and we don't really belong in that. I don't think, you know. But you also want to help them if it's, you know, if it's a David Lindsay Bear play and they're playing it like Pinter. Something needs to be said, you know.
Absolutely, and I think also, particularly once you have a sense of what the director is looking for, how they work on a scene with an actor, and what they're looking for, often it's very helpful, particularly when you're dealing with actors whose work you don't know that well, or sometimes who've asked that they come in and you work with them first and kind of head them on the right track, and then it's still very, you know, it's still very much their own audition
100%.
they're creating, and it's helpful, I think.
In terms of the dynamics in the audition room itself, preparation obviously is important. Any other qualities that actors must bring into that audition?
Preparation.
Preparation.
And you know what else I think is an ability to be present and listen in the room, because sometimes if you think about it, and I'm so impressed that actors can do this. They've learned a song maybe in 48 hours or less, and they've worked on it, and they stop singing for a moment, and a director approaches him or her and gives them some notes, and that director could be Matthew Orchis or Mike Nichols or Daniel Sullivan, you know, people who are intimidating to us, and we work with them.
Right.
And so here's this person who's learned this music. She stops, she gets some information and some ideas, and is expected to apply them and work on that in the room. It's brilliant and it's fascinating, but I've seen actors just not be able to really take it all in. And they'll call you the next day and say, I know what he's talking about,
Totally.
now I can do
Totally.
it. But that ability to be able to be present and listen and take on ideas, I think is a great...
And it goes to what Daniel's saying. If you are prepared, if you know the material backwards and forwards, you then have the luxury when you go in of being more malleable, of being able to take an adjustment that the director's giving. Some actors, I think, tend to do this active listening thing when a director is talking to them, where they're like, and it's actually, it's repelling it rather than taking it in. I think that's what Tara's alluding to. And it's sort of like you need to be zen in the moment and sort of like cock your ear like you're listening to a whistle in the wind, and you're not, and it's getting in, okay.
And I think it's not only about being able to listen to the director, because sometimes the director isn't giving
concise
you direction at the moment. It's also about being able to listen to the audition reader. I mean, you need to be, it's like any good acting. You know, you can tell when people aren't listening in a production.
Right.
It's not good.
Yeah.
And when you
Totally.
can immediately, it is the quickest thing you can tell in an audition is if someone's not present. They're on autopilot. They're performing the scene as they have rehearsed it, no matter what, and they're not listening to the audition reader. And if an actor can figure out, and a lot of that is emotional, so that you can kind of quiet your nerves enough to figure out how you can walk into that room and actually be present enough to be in the scene and listen, that's all they can
Buddhism.
hope to do.
I will be. And it's interesting too, in terms of adjustments, some directors are far more articulate. They do know what they want. And there's some clearly that are searching themselves a little bit.
And barely
some,
speak.
Yeah.
And
They're
barely
not
speak.
Or they just, they don't,
Or they don't want to.
they don't want to. Some are kind of shy.
Very shy. Joe Mantello sometimes stands in the back of the room. Hello. He's, as an actor, he has the empathy. But I think some actors hear an adjustment that they don't agree with. And I think sometimes that's when something has to kick in, where that's a microcosm of the rehearsal room right there. The director is directing that actor. This is how it's going to be for 4 weeks. So if the actor falls into, well, here's why I was doing that, it's like, understood, you've prepared. This is what the director is thinking, and the adjustment may be terrible. One actor one time, this is no joke, a director behind the table said to him after his first read, I like what you're doing, but I think that the character is probably 68% more gay than you're playing him. So 68% more gay. And the poor actor, I mean, talk about deer in headlights, is standing there like, I don't know what to do with that note. I'm going to offend half the room and my own sensibility, but I want the part. Next adjustment, I was wrong. I think it's probably actually 87% more gay. And the clearly the actor in that room, I apologize to him afterwards for the experience. He wants the job, but how do you do that? You go with it.
The other thing that's interesting as well is that often with a play, and it's one of the other great parts about what we do, we're involved in a pretty early part of the creative process. Often the director hasn't even started working with designers on the play when we're casting. They or they're just starting to do that as well. So they're really getting their creative juices flowing, I think, at that
Absolutely.
point. And so you're very much a part of that, and the director often is learning about the scene and about the script through the auditions. So sometimes as they work with an actor, they're really, it's partially about what they're learning themselves, and what they may be looking for, at the beginning of the day may be completely different by the end of the day, or more likely by the end of the week. So it's again a really sort of fascinating process.
The other thing I wanted to ask you was, have you ever been in a situation where a director has dismissed an actor and you've thought, give them another chance?
Chased an actor down the street to get him back after the actor was being let. I'm sure we've all done this.
Yep.
Chased an actor to an elevator, called them on their cell phone, sure.
Cell phones
Absolutely.
and texting have made that so much
100%.
easier.
We are advocates for actors at the same time, and that's part of what I love about the job. We see so much theater, we see the body of work of a lot of actors, which is a benefit, I think, in a room with a director that may not be familiar with that actor's work. And some actors who have Broadway credits, they have a legion of them, are sometimes not strong auditioners. And so it's our job, I think, to be able to say when someone leaves, here's what was going on there. I know this person, I know what this is. Some directors, you read the room, and sometimes the director doesn't want to, they know, and that's fine.
I think you can usually tell when it will be worthwhile to try to open up the discussion to reconsider an actor who's been dismissed. Sometimes and it depends on the basis for the rejection too. Sometimes you just know.
If it's metabolic and the director was just like,
that's right, it's not going to happen. Or just the imagination of the director. There's no ground of commonality between the imagination of this actor and the imagination of this director.
Right.
But sometimes if it's a function of the audition itself, or if it's an artist that you really feel that you've seen do many, many different things, then I feel a little more confident speaking up and suggesting that we might take another look.
And it can be any of a number of things, or sometimes someone leaves the room and you say, well, maybe we should have thought of them for a different role. And the director suddenly says, yes, can we get them back in for that? And, and then it turns into, the mad 100-yard sprint and who can run the fastest.
You become Jerry Lewis all of a sudden.
What happens when an actor comes with a lot of baggage? I mean, lots of talent, but also lots of baggage in terms of discipline or...
Luggage?
Yes.
Props?
Luggage. Or I meant emotional baggage.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you send the warning flares up to the director? Look, she's going to be difficult or he's going to be difficult. I just want you to know going into this that, there was
I probably would have thought of that before I brought the person in and
To begin
probably
with.
chosen not to at the beginning.
Yeah.
Or not, if it doesn't seem like it's going to work with the personality of the director.
Someone with that big a personality probably would have been discussed before he or she walked in the room, so that there would have been some, either in a creative meeting or in an initial meeting. You might have. That's where the lists are very useful, because you can put a lot of those names of those people, and then that kind of will generate a discussion like, oh, do we want to deal with him and all of that stuff that comes with him or her, and oftentimes you do. And so if it's
Is it worth it?
kind
That's
of
the question that
that's
gets
right.
asked.
It
Is
gets
it worth it?
And is there somebody else who doesn't have that? We'll look at those people too, but chances are we do want to do,
And everything is so individual. There are some people who may say, oh, so-and-so is so difficult to work with, I would never do that again. And other people love working with them. I mean, it's the way everything
relative.
works in life. It's all so subjective that you can't, there are very few people that you dismiss because you think, oh, well, they have emotional baggage. We all have
And
emotional
some actors
baggage.
are keen talkers, and a director will respond to that. And some directors are a lot more, let's just get right down to it, and
You're so
we don't
polite
really
and
want
nice,
to,
keen
and
talkers.
we don't want to be. That's my old boss, Jeff Johnson, is
Oh,
I'm
yeah?
a keen talker.
talker.
Yeah.
Which brought up your point in terms of being subjective. Marianne Doherty just died, a longtime casting director, and she said, or at least in the New York Times, she was quoted as saying, anybody that says that they knew this person would be a star is lying. It is a gut instinct. You go by your gut and luck in terms of this. There's something in your gut that says this person has the potential to be a star. Do you sort of agree with her on that level? And is your nightmare sort of turning down the next Barbra Streisand, the next Meryl Streep, the next, big star to come along?
I don't think so.
No, I mean, I don't think, I think it's fantastic when you've cast someone or you've been involved in a casting process where someone was put in a role that made them a star. That's incredibly exciting, but our job isn't to make stars. Our job is to cast plays really well.
Tell stories well.
And tell stories well. And that, I mean, I know that probably sounds boring, but it's really true. I think that the other part is an aspect of it, and it's exciting,
Absolutely.
but it's not.
I mean, there are those moments when you're sitting in a room and you're like, this person has something that is
All the
unique
time.
and special.
All the time.
Whether they're going to be a star or not, who knows? What that even is.
And whether you're going to get the opportunity to help cast them in that particular play or not,
Right.
who knows? A lot of times what we do is you see people and you think, wow, they're fantastic. They're not quite right for this, but they're right for 6 other things I'm working on, or maybe you don't have the chance to bring them in again for 2 years for something.
Right.
And that's sort of.
It's
Yeah.
a slippery slope, Patrick, in terms of saying, do you then question yourself if someone slipped through your fingers in some ways? And people are at different stages in their careers. Someone that we meet now Nina Arianda, we saw her in her league showcases at NYU. I have a good memory of Nina in that, but certainly I did not know at that time, when I saw Venus and Fur at CSC, I sat there and I thought, you are kidding me. This is something that is truly exceptional. And I had seen her already, but not that. And that's what makes this job amazing. We're not seers. We're not, you do the best you can with your instinct. But that's when it's exciting.
I must admit that every once in a while there is that moment where the pictures are out on the table and someone is avoided, and I think to I would never say it in the moment, but I think, well, okay, someone else is going to be, she's going to be in, she's going to be brilliant in somebody else's play, and we're missing an opportunity here.
I'll actually
not
say
that.
Yeah.
But
I think I'm too bossy. I think I'm more bossy than you, probably.
I'm probably not bossy enough. But, there are those moments where you think, oh, here's an opportunity missed.
Yeah,
100%. But
100%. Michael Hall years ago. Michael was one of those actors who he worked, but probably we knew before a lot of people that something was very special about Michael and Dexter.
Yes, it's the realities of the marketplace, certainly, that we have to have, producers feel that they have to have stars, or the insurance of a star. Do you personally, on some personal level, feel that their stars are taking jobs away from actors who can do a better job, really deserve it because they paid their dues, or would have a chance to go through that role, get into the star level? On a personal level,
it's a complicated question. I mean, I look at Tara casting Daniel Radcliffe in How to Succeed.
Well, I didn't cast
but casting How to Succeed, that production is employing how many actors? And so if for the one role they offer it to Daniel, and he is getting work for a lot of and he's fantastic.
It's
I mean, I think star casting gets a dirty name in a way because it feels like it's some Faustian bargain, I think, and it's not often that. I mean, if you actually think about stars who have done theater who truly couldn't do it, where it's egregious and it just seems so mercenary and there's nothing artistic about it, I don't think that happens as often as people would like to make it seem, So I think if it's a difference between a play that's worthy being produced and not being produced, I think it's a question, it's part of the times.
It's a reality of Broadway right now, and even off-Broadway right now, that there is a great pressure to have recognizable names in order to sell tickets, in order to raise money, in order to secure theaters. And so it's just a grim reality. And sometimes star casting is really exciting, and we learn something about that artist that we didn't know before when we see him in a play or a musical or whatever. And sometimes, we kind of all shake our heads and think, dang, that was a near miss, wasn't it? It could have been better.
Sure.
But it's I think of it as just, I can't rail against it because it's just part of the way it is.
I agree with that. It's the reality, and so we have to deal with it. I think what's unfortunate is that I think the climate is making it increasingly difficult there's sort of star inflation, so that people who 10 years ago would have been considered a star and would have sold a production no longer are in the same way, and I think that's unfortunate.
Well, there's this this whole. I think that actors get better and better the more they work, and so if you get to star if you play a leading part in a show, then that becomes kind of the fabric of who you are as a performer. So the more you do that, the more of a star you become, and when you have fewer and fewer opportunities to add into that general fund of talent, then something is happening. I think that might be what you were kind of pointing at.
Yes, exactly.
And yes, of course, that's going to...
It deprives people of opportunities. Yeah. But the other
deprives people of growth.
Which is why rep companies, like Cherry Jones at ART for years and years and years, playing so many roles. I think that's what you're talking about in some ways. Stretching as actors. Actors have to go out of town increasingly now to play roles that they really want to play at regional theaters.
How does casting a star affect casting the other roles? Does it change the dynamic? Does it change the job?
It's so hard to make a generalization about that, I think, because it depends whether it's probably a show where it's a single star versus a show that's 4 stars or something like that. I think it's a very different dynamic in each situation.
How did it work in God of Carnage? Did you have to keep all 4 actors in mind every time did you always have to think of it as
who's married to who?
Were you always thinking about all 4 at
I think
you'd
that
always
everything always would fall into one person would fall into place, and then that kind of begins to influence
So someone
the
would
rest
say
of the
yes,
casting.
and then
Yes.
you would say, okay, now we
Yes.
go
So-
into, yeah.
So who would they be married to, or who therefore is the right contrast in another couple, that sort of thing. And that became kind of someone has to sort of start the ball rolling in a sense, and that's
Yeah.
what would always do it.
Sure.
You're talking about chemistry largely then here, right, to some extent?
You're talking about chemistry primarily from an artistic point of view, and then you're also, I think, talking about from a commercial point of view, you're also talking about figuring out how that also impacts things.
When a producer says, okay, we have one crass term A-list star, Denzel Washington in Fences.
Right.
Denzel's going to sell tickets alone, no matter who else you put in that production. Putting Viola Davis in that production with him artistically is dynamite, you know, so that's fantastic. That said, Denzel would be enough to cast a very, very good New York theater actress in that role as well. People are still going to come to see Denzel. How many Denzels are there in the world? There's not a lot. There's not a lot of Hugh Jackmans. That's rarefied air. I mean, that is, you know, $60,000 at a Broadway Cares auction afterwards tells you what that is. That's over the top. You know, so the idea of, I don't know about you guys, I'm curious actually. I feel like part of our jobs now is to understand what producers think of stars who might sell tickets and what we think, I feel sometimes is disparate.
Absolutely, and different producers feel different ways about stars than theater owners do, and it's a complicated thing. It's interesting because it's a process we've become involved with at times. I mean, at Lincoln Center Theater, it's primarily not, which is fantastic, but it's something that casting directors have become involved with by the necessity of often requiring a star in order for a production to go. So it becomes a very important aspect of what we do, although it's not the primary aspect of what we do and not the primary aspect of what we love to do, which is
the least interesting in many cases.
Yeah, exactly, because you're dealing with a much, much smaller list.
100%.
You're dealing with far fewer options, whereas when you're casting a production with 10 people, with 30 people, whatever, you have an entire world, as Tara said, to populate, and that's incredibly exciting.
In the time that I've been doing this, it's changed in a way that, you know, when Scott Rudin has Denzel Washington to do Fences, that he's done that. He comes to us with it and says, we're doing this. Will you cast the rest? Then there's a whole other animal where producers will come to us with a script and they will say, okay, this will not get done until we have a star. So even contractually, we have to now, as casting directors, figure out a way to sort of Darwinianly adapt to that and say, okay, well, this can't go on forever. Contract me for 3 to 6 months and try to get a star. It's a different kind of pressure for us in a certain way. It's a different kind of dialogue. It's not, like Daniel said, I can't speak for you, it's not the kind of casting that I love. You know, that list making is, you know.
Well, it's just that it is a set group of people
Absolutely.
who will, it's like, and at this point, it's the same people who will
And I bet you're
greenlight
going
a
after
studio
similar
film.
people that I am right now at the same time. In the ether, the offers are out to the same people. You know?
But again, I think the bulk of what we do is not that. It's
Totally.
It's the other stuff, which is real casting, where there is a much different kind of dialogue about what you're doing, what you're looking for, how you're going to find it, that sort of thing. And
I am most envious of you casting Invention of Love and that kind of casting. Like that to me is like the heart of what we do or what I want to do. You know, rather than
I
casting
agree.
some big celebrity-driven thing, that is to me the goal. That is what
It's the
I
most
would.
creative and
Yeah,
tremendous
rich
work.
material,
Rich
actors
material.
that we love, that get the opportunity to work with a wonderful director and great text.
Jack O'Brien.
Yeah, I just think that's the goal for me. And we're going here a little bit, and it's like you said, it's the reality, but you know.
The nightmare must be the M word, miscast. And I don't know who judges that necessarily. Often you read it in a review, and sometimes the public goes quite along with it. When it has happened in your cases, why has it happened? Can you give us an example of that? Somebody that you thought would work for a part that didn't, or a director may have thought would work for a part and didn't quite. What are the reasons when an actor is
It's
miscast?
interesting because the very term, I don't even know how I feel about the term miscast.
So let's start there. Do you
in
think it's a
some way.
misnomer?
In some ways, but miscast to me is, you're going, it's not an exact science. You know, it's alchemy. It's alchemy with the director and the piece and the room. It's everything. And sometimes an actor can't quite get at, perhaps, the heart of something. I'm talking in circles, but I can't quite figure out what it is that I don't like.
Sometimes people use that term when, in fact, an actor is doing exactly what the director wanted them to
100%.
do. And so there, the blame gets put on the actor when it shouldn't be. That I think often people don't understand what directors do. So it's very hard for them to either blame or not blame a director. You read reviews, that will be a glorious review for production, and it will just say, stylishly directed by so-and-so, and you think, well, they must have done more than that,
Right.
I mean, it seems like there's often not, and unless you're in the room, you don't know, but the director
you're in
is
the room
who
and
is.
it still doesn't work out right. I mean,
Right,
because some element in the alchemy was off,
Right.
and we did, and
Right.
everybody congratulated everybody at the casting table and said, "Oh my God, this is all going to be great," and somehow either the process of the actor and the director didn't, they were not in sync, or the text didn't, couldn't really be plumbed by those two people together in the right way, or we'll never know, or whatever it could have been any number of things. So sometimes something goes wrong. I mean, and
Right.
Sometimes it's simply a difference of opinion, that the critic disagrees with the director's interpretation of the play. And part of that director's interpretation of the play is casting that actor in it. And that often is, that may be the case. And it's a difference of opinion.
And chances are it was a young woman.
Why is that?
Well, I just always think that young women are the hardest parts to cast, because I think everybody at the table casts so many of their own ideas about youth and innocence and sexuality and sense, whatever their own sensibility is on that person, and what is beauty and what isn't beauty, and how much beauty is required in order to tell the story. And so I always find it's a fascinating process to watch, to see a group of people decide who the young woman is going to be. And I find critics often don't agree with whatever that decision was, that the young woman should have been different and everything else would have been different. It's just
The John
kind of,
Simon School of
yeah,
review,
yeah.
to name names.
As you say, it's so subjective.
Absolutely.
And is there ever a time when the ball has started rolling and the director has to cut their losses and say, okay, fire an actor, this isn't working, fire an actor, and you're in the hot seat to quickly get a replacement? How does that work? And you're under tremendous pressure and tremendous time constraints. Can you give us-
And secrecy, because until everything is really settled, you can't, all of our work has to be done with a certain amount of discretion and secrecy
I think
until,
that's the first part for us, right? Making
Yeah.
sure that everything is going to be everyone will be handled well.
We're sort of like the CIA, basically. I mean,
Totally. There was
with
one
so many
actor
things.
that was fired from a show that I cast, and an actor was being auditioned for that actor's role in the next room because of the timing of it. It wasn't because anyone wanted to be. I mean, it was this perfect storm. I mean, it's terrible. It's just, it's never fun. It's never fun. It's never any one person's fault.
it's almost never the actor's fault. I mean, it's usually that the decision was wrong, and we thought we had picked had made the right decision, and it's in my experience, it's almost never the actor's fault.
Yeah.
And in terms of, do the directors or the producers come to you and ask you for your advice whether this person should be fired or not, or is it generally handed to you?
Sometimes
often?
it's really, I find it's, it's luckily a situation that doesn't happen that often, and it's completely different each
And if
time.
where it is in the process, if we've seen a run through of something, so we actually can speak to what is actually happening,
In the last 5 minutes that we have, I wanted to just turn to the subject of ethnic casting, because there was just a report in which Stephen Adley Gerges, the writer of Mother with a Hat, went public with his dissatisfaction with the casting of two actors who were non-Hispanic in Hispanic roles that we saw them in. Do you have any opinions of this to start with? And secondly, I think one of you cast Bombay Dreams, right?
I did.
You did. Is that a shallow pool that you have to cast from,
You know-
comparatively speaking?
Well, do you want to talk about
Yes, let's talk
Mother
about
with a Hat first?
Yes, let's talk
or-
about Mother with a Hat first.
I mean, I just read about that this morning or last night, I think. I mean, it's kind of the thing that's most interesting to me about it is, why did clearly someone thought that they wanted to tell the story with different people and in a different way. So I would have thought that the writer would have been consulted about
Without
that.
knowing the process and the sort of
Yeah, I
genealogy
mean,
of how it happened.
Yeah,
you don't
no,
know.
it's just you don't know. You know what I mean? Like it's interesting. You just wonder how it happened.
I think the casting notice that went out said no specific ethnicity required for those roles. I guess.
I think, though, that whatever the casting notice said isn't necessarily the most important point. The most important point is how they cast it, and that's what's created a problem, because the casting notice isn't what casts the play. It's who is considered for it and who
Right.
who
And
is
if on the
cast in it.
first day only white actors are coming in and there's some problem with that, that's going to be addressed or not. You know.
And then getting back to casting a Bombay Dreams or something that demands a lot of, I suppose Free Man of Color does to some extent, demands certain ethnicities. Is that a shallow pool was that a real challenge because of the shallow pool?
Well, it was just because it was also a musical, and so we had to find singing, dancing, South Asian actors. So that was the most challenging part of it because, there's a huge movie industry in India, and there are many South Asian actors, but there weren't a lot who sang and danced. And so we had auditions in Vancouver, LA, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, London. So we went Toronto, and we cast people in every city. That was the fun part. On opening night, like there was somebody from each stop of the casting trip. And so that was good.
No, I think that it's a very different situation in terms in terms of Free Man of Color. There's fantastic pools of African American actors, and it's.
In wrapping up, I wanted to ask each of you for an example of the most gratifying experience you've had in casting, just off the top of your head, and why. Obviously, you mentioned Invention of Love for him, but just go down the line and say what
God, there's so many.
has been among. Just
Honestly,
an example.
For me, it's just been being able to work with the people that I've been able to work with, quite honestly, the directors. The one thing I will say is when you were talking about Sada coming in for Mike Nichols, when Alison Pill came in for Joe Mantello for Blackbird, it was one of the most astonishing auditions I've ever seen in my life. And it was that rare moment, not rare, but that moment when it's so organically just like, I am so happy I do what I do. That was amazing. That was, I just witnessed that. I'm lucky doing what I do. So that was.
That excitement.
Yeah, it's huge, huge.
Tara?
I have many great memories. Two of the top ones involve Susan Stroman because they involve dancing, and the original day of dancing in couples for Contact. We had a huge room at Carnegie Hall, and that big, and 25 couples dancing together to that music blasting, and that was pretty amazing. And we didn't even really know what we were doing. Well, she did, of course, but I didn't really know what it was going to turn out to be. And then for the producer's movie, we had that same room with about 50 overweight and crazy-looking guys who were going to be the prisoners of love dancing together. And that was
That's awesome.
great day. I loved that day. Yeah.
I think probably just because it's most recent Warhorse and putting together a cast of so many people with such diverse talents all at one time was incredibly gratifying.
And one of the fascinating aspects that we talked about briefly before we started this telecast is the fact that the people who manipulate the horses are actors first.
Absolutely. It's really fascinating. People, they come from a variety of different backgrounds. There are a number of people who are out of great acting training programs like Yale and NYU's MFA program, and then there's some people who have major puppetry experience. Some of them have no puppetry experience. Some of them have some dance background. Some of them have kind of movement theater background. So it's
Is there horse camp? Do they go to horse
yeah,
camp?
well, basically
Do
they start rehearsing for 2 weeks before the rest of the company does,
Yeah.
and it is big time horse camp. But it's amazing in terms of finding people who have the physical ability to do it, and the physical and ability and passion to learn to do it is really what's involved in finding those folks, and it's a great and an exciting process doing that. But all of the, there's so many other cast members in it who have so many requirements about, either singing and playing an instrument, or being able to do certain accents, or being able to play certain instruments, do an accent, and puppet a horse. It's pretty
Their special
wild.
skills are wide.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you very much for a most stimulating
Thank you.
discussion. You made my job really easy.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. These programs are brought to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York in partnership with our friends at CUNY TV. On behalf of the American Theater Wing, I'm Patrick Pacheco, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Working in the Theater.
I'm Ted Chapin, chairman of the American Theater Wing. The Wing has played a vital role in New York's theatrical life for more than 60 years. Best known for creating the Tony Awards, we stand for excellence, but we also support education in the theater, and our work reaches beyond Broadway in New York. The Working in the Theater television programs, which are supported by the Annenberg Foundation and the Dorothy Straussen Foundation, are unequaled forums for discussions with today's most creative artists. Downstage Center's in-depth radio interviews were created in conjunction with XM Satellite Radio and can be heard on our website. For people who are starting their careers, we have a 2-week boot camp for aspiring actors from colleges across the country called Springboard NYC. And our theater intern group provides a forum for young people who are starting their careers to build a professional network. All of the American Theater Wing's educational and media programs are available for free on demand from our website, americantheaterwing.org. Thanks for your interest in the Wing, and thanks for watching.